What's up, guys? Keegan Hipgrave here. If you're interested in human performance, I guess how hormones play a role in confidence and how to increase your cognitive load, then this episode is for you. Today, we are talking to Vice President of Product here at Whoop, Alexi Coffey. Alexi was instrumental in building key health features such as pregnancy insights, menstrual cycle insights, stress monitors, and the Whoop coach, empowering users to have a bit more comprehensive understanding of their own health data. Alexi has an incredible, warm and curious nature about her, and she struggled with dyslexia growing up, and now she's a leader in a multi-billion-dollar company. This conversation was truly incredible. I think you guys are going to get a lot out of it, so enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the Keegan and Company podcast. For those who are new to the show, my name is Keegan Hipgrave. And guys, if you haven't already, could I get you to jump over, give us a little like and subscribe, whatever platform you listen to this podcast on, whether it's Apple, YouTube, Spotify. It's a great way for us to grow the podcast, grow the platform, and just have some incredible guests like I've got on today. In this episode, I'm joined by Vice President of Product here at Whoop, Alexi Coffey. How are you, Alexi?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
This is going to be sick. I'm so excited. We for those who are listening and not watching, we're here at the Whoop HQ in Boston. Very fortunate to be here, but it's a funny one because we've obviously had a bunch of podcasts over the last couple of days. We've got a couple more to go. But after our coffee this morning, I genuinely think that this is going to be my most favorite podcast.
I appreciate that. Well, I'm excited to see where it goes. And yeah, welcome to Boston and welcome to Whoop HQ.
Boston's sick. I love Boston. I love the HQ. It's beautiful. Before we kick into it, I'd love to get a little bit more of an understanding of your role here at Whoop.
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Product, so I oversee really the core of our member experience, if you think about it. So people wake up to Whoop, they go to sleep with Whoop. My team and I think and obsess over every single one of those details. Mm-hmm. And we work in partnership with everyone across the organization. So every algorithm that gets developed, there's a lot of product thinking there, all of the designs, working with hardware. So it's not just, what you see in the app, but everything needs to work end to end. So it's a lot of figuring out what we want to build, inspiring people to do really hard things because, we quantified hard things like stress and how much you slept last night. Mm-hmm. And stitching that all together into a really human way that we can deliver value to members. And as a membership, right, it's not just having hardware that works, but also delivering this drumbeat of value.
What do you think is your favorite thing that you've brought into the product?
Ooh. I think, I really love the daily notifications. Like you sort of wake up on Whoop and it's like you're having a conversation with Whoop. Telling you about your sleep, and you can kind of flick through some of those cards. It's small, but it's significant. So I think that's one dimension. And then I really love some of the things that we've done with pregnancy and women's health is a topic, I really love. And so just making the product work more for people, really personalizing it to their physiology is something. And there's more to come.
Yeah, I bet. I know that there's some things that we're not allowed to talk about, which is fine. Like you mentioned before, there are some great topics that I'm keen to flesh out. Before we do get into that, I do want to touch on a bit about your background. You're obviously in an incredible company now. You're managing a whole team. I did a run, Boston Steps, with one of your team members this morning, so, which was so hard. I don't recommend anyone to do it. No, I kid. It was great, but I'd like to know a bit about your background. Like, what does study look like coming into a position like this? Well, there's a few other, key pivotal moments that led to you being where you are today at Whoop.
Yeah, so I'd say from a career perspective, it's zigzagged out of building my own companies and then working for what I call really mission-driven teams and products like Whoop. And Whoop's an incredible company to work for and product to build for. But health has always been really personal, and so it's exciting to get to combine health and technology. From a young age, I was just really fascinated by the body. I had a lot of allergies growing up. I had a lot of injuries. I had epilepsy, dyslexia, and so it made me fascinated in understanding what's going on. How do I understand it better? As a teenager, I was a competitive runner and skier, and I really learned how when you fuel and recover, that had a huge impact on my performance. And I remember even I was running and I was really looking at how do I improve my time, and I just started getting interested in gluten. How did that impact me? And then as I started to run more or cut out gluten, that impacted my running, and then my running impacted my cognitive performance, and that helped me in school. And so it's just amazing, this mind-body connection. And I think to work on a product like Whoop now, where we start to bring that whole picture together. Like that's been something I've been thinking about my whole life. In my early 20s, I had a pretty life-altering health experience where I lost the sensation of my limbs and I lost the vision of my eye, and they didn't really know what was going on for a long period of time.
All of a sudden?
Yeah,
Or
like
was
one
it
day to the next.
so it wasn't a gradual increase, it was
No,
just like one day I can't see.
no, yeah. So
Wow.
a lot of kind of scary diagnosis being thrown around, um, and I ended up having to take the better part of a year recovering. And I often think about, what would that have been like if I had worn Whoop? And it really ended up being a series of both, physical and traumatic experiences that came together, and the body just was like, stop.
Really?
And yeah, it was huge. I think about this experience a lot. It just in terms of, you strip your identity away when you have to take a pause. I imagine a lot of people that kind of go through retiring from sports or, major transitions in their life have a similar experience. And yeah, and then I think, to continue my early or sort of mid-20s, I got really interested in women's health. Tracked my cycle for about a decade now. I think it's some of my favorite health data. Tells a whole story of like every time I've moved, longer stretches between cycles. Like there's so many cool stories in there. And then now, today, I have a 1-year-old daughter, and I'm thinking a lot about, what are the health decisions I make today? How do the behaviors I regularly do actually impact my long-term health? I don't want to be there for her. I want to live a really healthy, long life. And also, they just watch everything, right? So I'm like doing yoga in the living room, and then the next day she's doing downward dog. And so I'm very conscious of this right now.
That's that there's so many beautiful parts of that story that I'd like to unpick. I'd like to zoom in on when you were sick.
Yeah.
When you first got sick. How old were you when you
Like
first
20.
20?
Yeah.
And so because I know you moved out of home,
Yeah.
you moved over to New York, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, New Hampshire, but yeah.
New Hampshire.
It's the
Sorry,
states I've
it's
never
my
lived here
geography in,
before.
in America.
A little further north.
You said it was a mixture of a bunch of
Yeah.
things and stresses. What did that look like at the time? Were you conscious of the fact that you were stressed in a stressed environment?
Yeah, I mean, on the physical front, I had like broken my ribs. I had broken my tailbone in the past like sort of year, and I hadn't really healed very well
From sport?
from sport. Yeah, so I was climbing, it hurt my ribs, and then I was training for a triathlon and it hurt my tailbone. And so I knew that like there was some physical things because I was like trying to train, and I'd be like, my body's kind of breaking down. And I think, at least for me, when I was really stressed, I just kept going. And so I was aware that I wasn't like functioning as my like more regularly joyful self. But it sort of compounded. And I think there's a lot of like not listening to the feeling. And then it was like, hey, you need to listen now.
I know that you did play a lot of sport,
Yeah.
growing up. You did a lot of skiing, as well as climbing. Do you think those sports sort of, I guess, helped, or whatever way you want to look at it, get to that mind frame of pushing through stressful times? Do you think?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I definitely think they do, and they sort of build a mental fortitude. I also lived outside the year prior to that. I lived outside in the wilderness for 3 months with this group of 16 people, which was an amazing experience.
Can we? I feel like we can't. I feel like we can't skip over that. What? Why?
It's this program called NOLS. It's the National Outdoor Leadership School, and it's amazing. You're like sleeping, no tent. I mean, it's sleeping bag, stars. Every day you put all your things, of which you have like 2 shirts for 3 months, on your back, and you carry it. And so the first month is hiking. You're hiking every day from sunrise to sunset. Second month was kayaking, and the third month was sailing. And yeah, I've never seen a more beautiful sky than that. And we just didn't see any other humans for 3 months.
Incredible. What?
And so you just realize how like coddled our world is today, and how much stronger all of our legs are and our minds are than I think we regularly think about.
That's such an incredible experience. Why did you want to do that? Or
Um,
where did it come?
yeah, my grandmother had done something with like 50-year-old women that had done that, and then I'd heard about other people doing it. And it's a program that trains NASA. They train, a lot of companies for leadership. And so I've just been fascinated. And it was amazing as you do this rotating leadership structure. So every day there's a new leader. And it was cool to see different leaders across different terrains. So somebody's really confident hiking, and then they're very uncomfortable on water. And yeah, but you debrief every day. So it's like very, you just learn so much, and you're like, hey, I really liked when you did this. I liked when you asked everyone, did they have water? And it gets really like, it's primitive, right? Like the fights are about, do we have enough food?
Yeah. Did you take, what did you learn? Like, what did you take from that experience out into the big bad world?
Followers really matter. It's like leaders are important, but they are made by the people that choose to follow them, and that you can have really strong followers and they elevate a leader. So I think about that a lot in team structures. Uh, yeah, that grit. I mean, when it's hard, and sometimes work is hard or life is hard, I just remember like you hiked nonstop, and I hurt myself on that trip. That's where I had hurt my ribs, and I partly walked and partly was carried out of a canyon. And so you're just like, cool, you can do that. You can kind of do a lot of things.
That's far out. You would have taken so much confidence out of something like that. And then
Yeah,
and so was those, you said that those stressful events
yeah,
obviously was just a build up until it got to the point where, your body couldn't take it anymore. But
yeah,
that seems like a very dramatic thing, not being able to see and not being able to
yeah.
use parts of your limbs. What were the doctors saying?
Yeah, I mean, things like multiple sclerosis, other sorts of conditions. But it's kind of amazing how loud the body can get, I think, if it's burnt out.
Mm,
And this is why it's interesting to really continuously monitor your body, right? I had no data. So all I had was, what doctors were saying, and it was slow. And I actually went back to Switzerland. I grew up in Switzerland.
mm,
So I went back there and recovered for a little bit. Um, yeah, it was confusing to not know what was going on for a while. And then after that got better, I just had such low energy levels.
mm,
So I remember this milestone of I was doing paperwork. Like I must have been like it must have been like submitting taxes or something like really mundane, um, applying for something. And I was so proud that I'd filled out the form, that I had had enough energy to do that. And so it was just really building up the level of energy I had.
And so that was it. It was just a matter of like getting days on days, weeks on weeks, months on months until to getting
Yeah,
deep sleep. Yeah.
exactly. And just quieting it all out.
Do you think that, because I don't know, just from personal experience and lived experience, and probably talking to a lot of friends on this podcast, it's like sometimes like the hardest things you go through often lead to some incredible outcomes that you wouldn't even be able to foresee. Do you resonate with that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it's funny. I was chatting with my team recently about um, fearlessness, and how I think it's really important when you're building hard things to be brave and bold. And some of that fearlessness for me was grown in that time, because after that, I just said, hey, I'm going to go work. I really want to go work in tech. I want to build things. And I just moved on from that, and I jumped into that. And it wasn't like I had fully finished my degree and had a bunch of laurels in which to rest on. And so I think there's two things, both sort of like the fearlessness and sort of like you're just kind of going for it. And so I live very much in a this is it mindset for two reasons. One is that could happen any day to anyone. And two, kind of this is it, right? Like go create, go build, go do fun things. And then I also think like my identity got shaped in such a way that I got really good at just being Alexi. Not Alexi who's a runner, not Alexi who's good at this, not Alexi who's that. And that's really like, that's my happy space to return to when things feel intense in the world. I just go like, it doesn't matter. Just strip it all off. Like it's Alexi, right? And so I think that has been, as I've done things, I've worked hard, that is something I come back to, and it's sort of like my calming thing.
I think that's a good reminder
Yeah,
for a lot of people, and not just people who are in the sporting world, because we obviously have on this podcast we talk to a lot of athletes and professionals, and even again me personally just think it's so easy to get caught up in that whoever you are, like
who you are and who people think you should be.
exactly. What advice or what tips sort of help you get back to being Alexi? Like, and how, because I imagine there's probably a lot of people, you're a product of your own environment, yeah? Like you're around certain people and you have these expectations and you sort of like, well, this is the person I want to be. How do you get to that point where it's just like, nah, it's okay just to be where I'm at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. So nature's always been really amazing for me. I mean, I grew up in Switzerland, so I was always exposed to a lot of nature. I can just kind of step into a forest or look at a lake, look at the sky, and I just kind of like it's a reminder or trigger for me in a positive way. Breathing, surrounding myself with people who know me and are good. Like, hey, you know, by the way, I see this thing.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. I like time in the day. It can be a few minutes. Right now, I feel like it's pretty compressed to just be writing. And then I think just, yeah, like what are the things that light me up? Like connecting with people lights me up, building things lights me up, like creation. But just, yeah, I think it's the simple things. I don't forget the simple things.
I love that all these past experiences have sort of gotten to you to the point where it's just like human performance is something that you're super passionate about.
Yeah.
You've spoken about the female space, which we've had a few conversations with in the past, which I am really, really keen to explore. One of the conversations we had prior was around hormones and confidence, which is something that I have a lot of conversations with in the female space back in Australia. And it's something that I guess obviously I don't know because I'm a 27-year-old male, not in a female body. But from the conversations that we have with the girls, is that it's just an unawareness piece and almost a lack of educational piece in terms of the relationship between hormones and confidence. I didn't actually know that there was a relationship, but there is.
Yeah, there is. Absolutely. I mean, just talking about women's health at large, like 1 in 4 women have some hormonal imbalance in their lifetime. And it's really hard to know when you have it. A lot of people go through many years undiagnosed. Conditions present in women differently. And then what's interesting about confidence is that, there's evidence that it's tied to the cycle. So it often happens for people in the luteal phase of their cycle, which is after ovulation, 10 to 14 days before having a period. Basically what's happening is progesterone is peaking. So progesterone can kind of like, while that's happening, it can make you feel a little bit more lower energy, fatigued. And then estrogen is sort of fluctuating, but towards the latter half of the luteal phase, it's going down. And this is usually a mood stabilizer. And then that's interrupting serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that regulates mood. And so that can make people feel slightly more anxious, slightly less confident. What's amazing is when you gather a group of women around for dinner, and this is what I started to do in New York because I was really interested in hormones. I'm like, am I crazy? Do I feel like amazing half of the month and then kind of crazy the next half? And I just didn't really understand it. And there's so much cultural construct around women, right? Like women crave chocolate, women are crazy. And so I was like, what is science and what is real? And so I started having these conversations with people, and they're all like, yeah, I also don't feel as confident. And what's cool about it is it's actually relatively predictable. And so, it's amazing to chat with executives, athletes who say like, hey, I know this thing's going to happen. I'm going to feel slightly different. And they plan their calendars around it, or they just understand that their sort of emotional resilience or their like self-care practices need to change so that you're not caught off guard. I think the hardest part is when you're like, oh, I feel like off. And I didn't expect to feel off.
I imagine that piece would be huge. That is the awareness piece, because you can't change time and you can't change the weekly or the monthly calendar. But I really like that piece around planning for those 2 weeks. But there will be times in the prior 2 weeks where, am I correct in saying the prior 2 weeks is when you're
basically
feeling
like after ovulation, before period is the way to think about it. That's sort of like a 10 to 14 day stretch.
So what can you do? Because from everything that you've just said, I get a feeling where it's just like almost energy will definitely help with confidence. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, I think it's things I've done and things I've seen. It's so like as you get like lower confidence, and it's not for everyone, right? Every single cycle is different. Every body is different. And also I think like one thing I feel really strongly about is doesn't mean you have to be less confident in that time. It just means you feel less confident.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to play with, right? But yeah, it's having awareness and then understanding, well, what are the strategies that make you feel better?
And so what are some of the strategies that you've used personally or that you've seen other people use that have been helpful?
Yeah. So, if you can, like scheduling really high stakes meetings at other times, but that's obviously not always possible, not always recommended either. But if you have that flexibility, like great. Other things is just being aware. It's kind of similar to on Whoop today. If you wake up and you have a low recovery and you still got to do a big thing, I've seen a lot of people, and I do this myself. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to be really compassionate to myself. I understand I'm operating from here. The asks of me in this situation are here. And so here's this gap that I've just got to like pep talk my way into. And it kind of similar, right? Like my confidence level's here and this moment is asking for here. And so it's very similar to having a lower recovery score. And you're just like, great, I can do this, right? And it's, having people who, I have a couple friends that I will like text and they're like, you've got this. Or, my husband, I'm like overthinking things. He's like, just go for it. here's where, just walk out the door, you're good, right? And just like having people that help with that. For me, running more before, I actually find is better during that phase of the cycle. Eating really well, getting enough sleep. Sleep efficiency also gets interrupted in that time. So just like not grinding as hard makes a difference.
The communication piece is something that stood out to me a lot just then, and then also in previous conversations that we've had. You talked about being kinder to yourself, the communication internally. Is that something that you're looking at on your Whoop data, where if you're in the red or in the green, this is something that I might pull back from if you do have like a big training load or a big workload?
Yeah. I think, at least me, I think though a lot of people expect that we just wake up and we're kind of the same always, right? Like we're always good. And one of the things that's so beautiful about Whoop is it shows that we're not. We don't wake up every day equal. And cycles are kind of similar. It's got a sort of a cyclical pattern to them. And so, yeah, I very, very much use my Whoop data and understand, hey, like you have more sleep debt than normal today. Just know that. You're going to be more reactive. You're going to, not, like I have to modulate to be at my best. It is not naturally going to happen.
Do you find it more tricky being in a leadership position where you've got a team underneath you? I'm thinking of captains. I'm thinking of executives. I'm thinking of people in leadership positions where the stereotype is like I've got to be on the whole time or all the time, or people expect me to be on the whole time. Do you have those challenges? Do you have any advice for people who might be going through certain things like similar?
Yeah, I think I'm learning still. It's a place I've thought a lot about, right? So we're a human performance company. I'm a leader of that. We have an always-on product, so it's not like there's no issues, right? There's things that it is in the world. I'm accountable to those things, but I really care about building an amazing team that has high psychological safety, because we know that builds, has the best innovation and is super important for what we're doing here. So yeah, it's a tug between taking good care of myself. And then also, doing good things and yeah, it's a job that's intense. I've seen lots of different styles of leadership over time, but at least what I get personally interested in, as I think back to that earlier experience, is like you can't run out of steam. And so a lot of research has been done on sleep debt and psychological safety. For every 45 minutes. Go.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you this whole time.
No, please interrupt me.
Because there was the one thing, a thing that stood out was the psychological safety piece with your team. What is psychological safety, and how does it relate to someone in a team environment?
Yeah. Psychological safety is, do you feel comfortable sharing any ideas? Do you feel comfortable speaking? Do you feel like you can show up as your full self? And it's super important to teams, something I deeply value in team building. Especially in tech, where I think you need many more diverse minds working on products, especially products that we all use every day. And yeah, so I think you can feel it basically like, does it feel safe to be on this team? Or do you feel you have to really be edited? Do you feel kind of scared to ask any question? Do you feel like there's, retribution if you do something wrong? So that's low psychological safety.
What do you do to help build good psychological safety?
Yeah.
Like what are the things that you're including in your team?
Yeah. I do a number of different things. I try to relate to people on a human level, right? If you, I want to know what's going on with you outside of work as well as inside of work. I try to make it so that various voices can be heard and sort of pay credit, like this is a great idea that came from Sam, or this is a great idea that came from Hillary, and sort of pay credit to that. I really try to be like, hey, you two are thinking alike, and sort of bring people together in conversations. When I do my team all hands, I'll often have an open floor, like any other questions, even on hard topics. And I really value that. So I always look for, did people have questions and did people speak? And if they didn't, then there probably wasn't enough psychological safety. Well, I've been in rooms and situations where people didn't speak.
Yeah, I get it. Likewise. And you are doing a good job, because I spoke to Stam, one of your team members, at the Boston Steps this morning, and I don't know, we just started talking, saying how we have the podcast coming up, and we talked about your leadership style. Is like you're very empathetic. You're very you're happy to talk to everyone in your team. I love what you said about getting to know them outside of the professional setting, and it was a really cool thing to see, because like you have had leaders where you might not feel comfortable. You might feel like an edited version of yourself, or you feel like if you are going to say something that it might be wrong, you might be scrutinized, especially in a high testosterone rugby league setting where it's just like, if you do anything out of line, you're going to get abused for it. But I think a big part of that conversation is the external communication. We talked about internal communication to yourself when you're feeling a little bit, down or run down or in the red. But that external communication to other people in your team, I imagine, and probably not just to your team, probably at home, to your partner, to other friends. Are these conversations that you're taking outside the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I have Whoop on a lot of people in my life, so
And
there's a lot of people that
are you in the teams as well?
I am in the teams. Yeah, I have a family team. I have a couple different versions of my family team because
Gotcha.
Concentric circles of people wearing it. I have a team with my husband, and he'll be like, "Hey, I just noticed that you didn't get that much sleep, even if I'm traveling."
Yeah.
He's like, "How you doing?" And like, that's just, you don't even need to have a long conversation about it. I think people aren't great at telling you how they're feeling. We don't often have full vocabulary. And what's amazing about some of the language that we've built at Whoop, I'm in the red. I only got 60% sleep performance last night. If you know what that means, you know what that means, and you know what that feels like. And so that language, when we brought my daughter home and we had a newborn, we would compare sleep data and say, hey, like I need to sleep more than you, and you can listen to the the baby monitor.
So funny,
and one of us would have like eye mask and earplugs, and the other would be listening, and we trade on and off. But we use data for that. I've heard couples and I've seen couples who both wear Whoop will have agreements like if they're both in the red, they won't speak until the afternoon because they found that then that reduces their fights. So that's like language, right? I was chatting with somebody on my team, and he was saying that they have a little like sort of a sub team, and he'll look at people's recovery before their one-on-ones and just understand, how should he best show up. And so it's hyper tailored. And I think that oftentimes people say, "How you doing?" And they say, I'm fine. You? I'm great." There's so much more there. But it often can take a long paragraph to really go through all of that. In just a few words, you can connect and resonate with what someone feels.
It sounds so efficient. Like it's like instead of sitting down and or even just might be just treading on eggshells, like while you're at home or in the workplace, and understanding like, oh, is this person actually going to be in a good mood today? Where if that's normalized, and it's obviously it obviously is here.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, I'm in the red today. I think that sounds like such an efficient way of getting things done, and also probably saving some marriages and relationships as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't capture every single part of your feeling, and so I think with wearables is important. Like Whoop captures a lot, and I think it's adding that human layer on top of that of like, I feel these things, and yes, I resonate with that. But yeah, it is super efficient.
Tying into feeling overwhelmed and stressed, do you believe, like, I think that self-awareness piece is a huge piece, and understanding your levers of when you are stressed and those things that I think can help you come out of that. Yeah. Is there any like processes or protocols that Whoop has incorporated in their day-to-day where if you are in the red or if you are in the green, then the work setting might change?
I would say, so we have a sleep plan, a performance plan. So if we encourage people to sleep at Whoop, and you get compensated if you hit 85% sleep performance. That's a pretty cool perk.
That's great.
I'd say there's places in the building in which you can do recovery activities. So like taking an ice bath. I think you're out there this morning, or you're going to go out there later. Obviously if people have things that are coming up, they can chat with their managers about that and get support. But I would say, like, even if you're in the red, and this is important, we chat with a lot of athletes that say that share this. Even in your red, it doesn't mean you don't perform. It just means do so with an understanding of what your capacity is that day. And I think disappointment comes from thinking you're up here, meeting this moment, and you're actually here. And so just really knowing what that gap is, I think, is valuable. So yeah, I would say we have some practices, but it's really just understanding and empathy.
So what happens when you might be coming into a race, or you might be coming to a big meeting where you are in the red, and your expectation is up here, and you're probably sitting down here? Mm-hmm. I know the awareness piece is probably a great thing to know, But is there anything that we can do in the moment to get us up to that next little bit? If it might only be for an hour, half an
Yeah.
hour, is there anything that we can do?
Sunlight, water, moving, music. I find really motivating. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of science around that. Just like little short protocols, balancing your blood sugar, and then I think it becomes fuel for the next moment of, hey, I met this moment that I really wanted to perform in,
Yeah.
and I wasn't ready for it. So how do you, have really great sleep consistency practices, and how do you, have a routine regularly that supports you being able to perform at any moment? Because especially at work, right? Like it's not like you can be like, oh, I'm preparing for this one event. You're kind of always on.
Yeah. Do you
And
get nervous at all?
yeah,
Because like from the outside looking in, you're a leader at an incredible company. You're very well spoken. Obviously, clearly very good at what you do. Seems like you've got a lot of confidence going out outside, which I'm sure you do. But do you have like what are some examples? Like you said, you do get nervous. What does that look like?
I go in phases of nervousness. I got really nervous recently because I really cared about the situation. And I was presenting, and I needed to walk through both a lot of visuals that had a lot of clickable elements, and then explain what we're doing and why. And I was unusually nervous. I was like, why am I nervous? It was because a lot of people had put a ton of work into it, and the moment felt big. And it was funny, I started to visualize. I have a 9-year-old daughter. She's a 9-month-old daughter at the time, and she is just like really out there energy. And I was like, just channel her energy. And I just went from feeling super nervous to feeling like, oh, let's make this fun.
Yeah.
And I did. And I just it felt really fun to do.
Mm.
And so I like to dance with nervousness. When I used to race,
I thought you said you were going to like to dance. I was like dancing in front of everyone.
no, actually really not. But,
I was like, if you want to dance, you can dance.
no, I like to dance with nervousness. When my ski instructor, he'd be like, all right, who's nervous? I'd be like, great. If you're not nervous, he's like, it means you don't care and you should get off this course.
Wow.
And it was such an interesting framing that like nerves can be powerful and positive. It means you care.
That's I subscribe to that.
Yeah.
I fully subscribe to that. I think even to be honest, even coming in here, like doing these podcasts, we've been in here for a couple of days, and I think each conversation that we've had have seemed to be getting less nervousness. But I think I'm very grateful to be here. I think it's a very cool thing to come over to Australia, to Boston, get to talk to you and some incredible athletes and some incredible people at your organization. But there was like a level of nerves. And it was funny. I think it was yesterday, just before we did a podcast with day before with Emily Capitalupo, and I had these like little feelings of nerves, but then I reminded myself, it's just like you get to have a conversation with someone who's incredibly and I got super excited about it. Even beforehand, like we did the Boston steps this morning, like a little bit tired from the steps. The steps are hard. Like for anyone who hasn't done the Boston steps, it's Harvard University. It's a very tough thing, but a little bit tired, a little bit nervous, and then I was like. And then we had our coffee this morning, and I was so energized after. Like I was like, I'm so just so excited to be here. Like we're talking about like hormones and confidence, like psychological safety, understanding when you're being stressed. Like these are all things that, yes, will resonate with people in our audience, people in the sporting industry, but selfishly, me personally as well. Another thing that we spoke about earlier this morning, and what you've alluded to earlier in the conversation, is that you grew up with some sort of dyslexia, which blows my mind because you're obviously in an incredible space in a leadership position here at Whoop. How do you go from being someone who has struggled prior with education, and I ask this because I've gone through similar things, to where you are now?
I think you just kind of have. I think I figured out how to make it helpful. Like it's like an advantage in many instances, and not in all. I don't think I'm a great speller still, and that's fine for the most part. But it's really a lot of like it got me just really interested in how do you learn things, and then if you figure out how to learn one thing, then it starts to help me figure out how to learn anything. And so I focused a lot on just like not learning math, but like how do you learn how to learn, and that really transformed how I thought about learning, where I used to get really frustrated. I'd be like, I can't do it. And I often found in school the hard things were easier for me and the easy things were hard, which made it hard because like the teacher would skip along on things. I'm like, I'm not getting the basics.
Can we just pull back a little bit? Yeah.
And then, I mean, honestly, like sheer brute force of learning, and I'm very visual, and so I would like draw out everything I needed to do. And then every couple of years, I probably adapt my strategy. But like computers are really helpful, and like typing really fast has been hugely helpful just for me to get ideas out and to feel like I can kind of keep up with how my brain works. And then, yeah, I mean, it's so much more easier. There's things like spell check, and I don't have to read books all the time. I love reading. I love listening to things as well. But I think it's just like figuring out, my mind works really fast on certain things, and I love ideating and generating ideas. And so it's like, how can I do more of that and less of the things that I don't feel as awesome about? But I really I don't think and wake up and act. Like, I don't think I have dyslexia actively all the time.
Mm.
I'm like, oh, why is this harder? Be like, oh, yeah, there's this thing.
You talked about learn how to learn.
Yeah.
That seems like such a beautiful piece of knowledge or advice. How do you learn?
It's trying to figure out, like, I'm like, okay, great. I want to understand this topic. Like, what are the fundamentals of this topic? So you kind of think about it as like skills trees, right? So if you're like, okay, I want to get really good at product. Well, how do you get really good at product? Okay, you need to understand all the different dimensions of product. Like, what are all the things that one needs to get good at? And then what are all the kind of beginner layers of that? And then you go up and you say, okay, great, now I've improved in these areas, and what's the next layer? So it's like, I think learning can feel overwhelming if you don't know where to start. And then for me, it's figuring out how do you effectively learn? So I'm a very like visual learner and kinesthetic learner. It means I've got to draw it out, and then I got to do the thing. And the more I do that, the better. But if I'm just in a classroom listening, it's not retained at that same level.
So what I got from that is start easy, start small, and then try and level up from there.
I say start easy. The thing though, at least for me, is if I don't understand how it fits into a bigger picture, I don't know where to place the piece. And so start easy, but understand what the bigger like elements of this area of knowledge is.
Gotcha.
Same with like health, right? If you want to learn how to sleep better, okay, well, what are all the different things that go into sleep? And so just, I think having some mind map of what those are, it doesn't mean you need to know all of the external branches and nodes, but then you at least know the sort of foundational part. Because I think it can feel disorienting if you're like, okay, I just know this bigger piece, and you don't know, is that bigger piece the whole thing, or is there a way bigger field?
Do you think that our self-dialogue plays a part in how we perceive ourselves and how smart we are? Because I know just from personal experience, like when I was younger, struggled with learning. I remember this story of my dad. We were doing like the spelling, like we go home, we have a list of words, and you have to spell them out. And I couldn't figure out like was. And he's like, I was saying it like was, and he's like, was this was? And I was like, oh my God, I can't figure this out. It must have been like, it was only last year. No, I'm kidding. But that was, and so I remember constantly having this inner dialogue. I was like, oh, I'm not smart enough. I can't do that. And so I leaned into my sports a lot. And then it wasn't until probably I got a little bit older into high school where my mum's really academic, and so she pushed me towards like harder subjects. Do you think that self-dialogue, and then obviously had like a bunch of confidence and built off that, but still something that is underlying, I think. Do you think our inner dialogue plays a bit of a part in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think our inner dialogues are allowed with everything we do, right? Yeah, I'm curious also to hear more about your experiences.
Yeah.
Like, how do you? I'm just curious. Like, how do you cope today?
Well, I think I'm constantly trying to prove to myself that I am capable of doing things, especially from an intellectual point of view, because I still find these things hard. We were having this conversation this morning, like academics and studying. That's really hard for me. You tell me to go. Obviously, I was talking about running the Harvard steps, but go do a gym session, go do a run, go do anything physical, and I can just do it. I have very little barrier to entry for that. I can just go get it done. But whereas if you were to tell me, go study for 3 hours after work, that's a hard thing. Or go to or try and understand this concept. I'm studying psychology at the moment, and that's kind of a way to almost prove to myself that I am going to be okay, or that I am some sort of like intellect. I'm not too sure, but that internal dialogue is something that I've sort of probably figured out in the last couple of years, and so I'm constantly trying to figure out, well, how do you change that inner dialogue? Is it a matter of just getting runs on the board and proving to yourself? Is it your environment, being around other people? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I kind of think I love the thread that you're pulling on of just like you're constantly trying to show that you're capable, and then you can do the next thing, right? And so it's like, when you do one thing, you're like, wow, I did that thing. Okay, well, now let's see what else I can do. And so I think the inner dialogue of just like wanting to see your full potential and recognizing when you've reached a milestone, you've done a thing, and you sort of is like, you're only as good as your last act. And so how can you keep pushing, keep pushing? And then I think also just like we could do hard things, and it's figuring out what is our unique skill set in which to do those hard things repeatedly. And then it's kind of limitless if you really want, like, if you really are interested in how far our brains can go. That's how I think about it. It's like I'm always fascinated by like, well, what can I do next?
But imagine putting yourself in a position where it's just hard enough for it to be challenging, but not too hard for the fact where you're going to be overwhelmed and anxious.
Yeah, like finding your edge. I think is always interesting. Even like watching like little humans grow, it's like, wow, they're at their edge.
Yeah,
And that's
really.
where really great learning happens.
You're obviously seeing that with your young one.
Yeah, it's amazing. My husband and I would be like, I think she's on her edge right now, and it's just, yeah, you see humans can grow. We're so much more capable, I think, than we sometimes give ourselves credit. And so yeah, that is a cool way to think about learning.
The thing about doing hard things, we talked earlier this morning about increasing your cognitive load, which is something that obviously after the last 5 minutes, something I'm very interested in. How do we increase our cognitive load? Is it just a matter of consistently doing hard things?
I think hard without rest doesn't work, right? And so it's similar to strain and recovery. You can think about that. I think it's doing hard things, stabilizing, doing more hard things, stabilizing. And I'm by no means an expert on this, but just lived experience on this topic. But I think, yeah, even in yoga, it's interesting if you think about the way that you formulate a yoga sequence. You often want to go hard, sort of like harder pose, open pose, harder pose, open pose. And I think if we only muscle up in everything we're doing, we don't really get time to digest and synthesize those things. And then people burn out too.
What are some other ways that we can increase our cognitive load?
I think so. A couple of other strategies I use is I'll just try to like overwhelm myself with content sometimes. So if I'm trying to like spike on something, I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna consume as much content as possible on this for a moment.
Even though you might not be understanding it.
Yeah, but I'm just sort of like, it's like sort of like immersion. And it's almost overwhelming. And like, okay, what do I really know and understand? And so that like increases capacity. And then I think sometimes you feel just thrown into situations where you're like, wow, this is intense. You can kind of choose to push through or pull away. And so I often, if I notice, at least for me, I'm like, oh, I'm getting the sensation this is overwhelming, that I sit with it for a moment, and then I often push and stay there because it's like, okay, this feels like it's near the edge. And so I think just being heightened awareness to, is this an opportunity? Is this an opportunity to increase my capacity? So even all of, just going back to being dyslexic, like all of the strategies that I had growing up, like getting a lot of time to draw out things, getting a lot of time to write notes, I don't have the time to go do that anymore. And so, even as I've grown as a leader, it's like, okay, I have to be really present in a lot of conversations. I have to remember a lot of different things. And so I've changed my capacity to do those things over time. And each of those moments of like, okay, leveling up has been a fun moment to say like, this feels overwhelming and I'm going to adapt and figure out how to get comfortable with this.
I'd love to get your thoughts on another way to potentially increase your cognitive load, and I'm not too sure. But I remember I had a mentor a couple of years ago, and he'd be constantly explaining things to me. And here I am, just a young kid, thinking, oh, it's so nice that this guy's like, spending so much time really being able to explain things to me so I would understand. But it wasn't until a couple of years afterwards where I was pretty much just said to him, like, look, thanks so much. I really appreciate all this time. And then he said something along the lines of, mate, I'm doing this to really concrete these thoughts in my brain and having to explain it. Because I think it's one thing of thinking that you've got it, but the ability to explain it to someone who doesn't know the concept. That's what his thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, teaching is really powerful, and being forced to synthesize so that you can explain to someone else. Yes. I resonate with that a lot. And then I think there's another one just on, like, we can't forget all of this is on a foundation of really good sleep. And it's amazing how if you want to sort of work on the brain, you don't just directly work on the brain. But it's, okay, well, what's your exercise practices? Are you, for me, a lot of my best thinking comes from running, from walking. And so cognitive like unlocks are often there. It's not like, okay, I'm studying, I'm working, I'm writing, I'm typing, like, yes, great thoughts come there, but it's often when you're doing other things. And so I think I think capacity comes from just like doing a lot of diverse things.
Yeah.
And often like dots get connected in weird places, right? It's like you can think about, probably something you've done with rugby is super relevant to what you're doing today in a really unusual way. And that increases capacity.
You talked about connecting the dots. I've heard before around if you doing some really big study or might be working on a project or whatever that might be, and you can't quite figure it out, and then sleeping on the issue, and then you wake up to the next morning, oh my God, it was so simple. What's happening there? Do you know what's happening there?
I mean, better one family than me, but I would say like we know that a lot of really important processes happen into our brains at night. And so, your brain kind of gets a chance to go and synthesize the day and take all of those new learnings and metabolize those. And, even if you're doing like strength training and you don't get enough sleep, your muscles don't actually grow. And so the brain is an extension of that. But yeah, it's amazing. I think it's like when you're watching a kettle boil and the hot water's it feels really long. It's the same as if you're trying to work on a problem and you just are not, just watching it too much. And I think sometimes if we just give ourselves the space to not solve it in that moment, dots connect.
I love that. So I love that so much. We've talked a lot about learning, and I know you've seen a lot of learning in your young one. I think that's really cool. What do you think's the biggest thing that you've learned from her in the last 12 months?
I mean, I think she just has an incredible energy and just loves connecting with people. But so that's obviously really fun. I think one of the coolest things, I kind of feel like I've had a sleep study in my own house. Because you bring your baby home and you just really hope that they sleep. And we did a lot around optimizing circadian health, so giving her exposure to light in the morning. We try to give her really consistent bedtimes and wake times. It's kind of like clockwork at this point. And just, I think, as adults, you actually like put babies to bed and you play music and you do all these things. And so it's just amazing to see, like, if you do those things, people sleep really well. And as adults, I think we become less good sleepers, or many of us do. And it's been amazing to see, how incredibly capable the body is at adapting and then going and following a rhythm.
You've obviously got a personal connection to human performance, and you're working at a health performance product and wearable. Do you think all those things have attributed to what you want to do with your young one?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think in general, it's, how do you, and parenting is super different. Every parent's different, but how do you, I think a lot around how do I teach her some of the sort of like really basic elements of living that'll help her long term. So like, how do you help her be a really good sleeper? Because I think knowing how to sleep is a gift and it's a super vital life skill. How do you feel secure attachment? How do you have a curiosity for the world and learn? And so we often are just like, hey, try this new thing or say hi to this person. And she's so funny. If we go to a coffee shop and somebody doesn't say hi, she's like, ah.
Oh, really? Oh my God, she's so extroverted.
Yeah, she's got a lot of personality. And so those things. And now this year, I'm thinking, she just turned 1 a few days ago. My husband and I were chatting about what we think is important for the next year. And it's a lot of, you start to have more emotional, like, no, I don't want to do these things. And so I'm thinking a lot about how do we teach her how to emotionally regulate? Like, what does mindfulness look like for a young person? And how do we teach those skills to her now instead of when I was learning them in my 20s? And I just think a lot around how do you have enduring skills and teach them resilience, because I think this is a world that's going to change a lot. We're all reinventing ourselves many times over. And so those are super valuable tools to have.
Just along the pregnancy piece, I have a lot of friends back in Australia who we've had on the podcast who are professional athletes, semi-professional athletes, obviously female, and they might have a baby in the peak of their, professional career. And more recently, they've actually come back and are now playing at an extremely high level, like multiple girls. But a lot of the education or their lack of education was them just figuring it out. When we first started having them on the podcast, I was like, what did you do? Like, who did you talk to? Like, what research did you lean on? It's like, oh, we have strength and conditioning trainers at our clubs who were, males, and they were obviously a bit conscious of the fact that we were coming out of a pregnancy. But they were just figuring it out. What happens to the female body, during pregnancy, after pregnancy? that may help or hinder the return to professional sport, or even just everyday being active?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, right? People can go about their daily lives and grow a human. A lot of things are happening in the body. The obvious one, growing the actual human. But it's interesting, even if you look at Whoop data in particular, and we've done research on this. So HRV declines over the first, majority of the pregnancy, and then it starts to increase again about 7 weeks before delivery, and then resting heart rate goes up. So your blood is just pumping through, trying to supply fuel to this growing human. I mean, so many changes in sleep. A lot of people will say that they found out that they were pregnant because they were sleeping so much more. They can measure it on Whoop. It's kind of a fun early one. And so I think, every pregnancy is different. It's sort of hard to say this is exactly the formula, but I think there's some really powerful stories about how people really understood what was going on in their pregnancy. They felt empowered, and then postpartum, just really having data to understand what is going on. Are you getting enough sleep? It's such a disruptive time when you have a human that needs you all the time. And I think that we underestimate a lot of what women are capable of. And it's amazing to see so many athletes, be it like peak performance post-pregnancy. Even, for myself, I sort of like had a lot of like, what are these cultural constructs, right? That you're going to feel really mentally fatigued the whole time. And it was a really creative period for me. And so I think, research heavily under research for women, especially pregnant women, because people are often nervous about doing studies on them. But really just, I think the science needs to be written. I think more innovations and work is going to be done in this space, but I'm so excited that people are speaking about it more and not feeling, the talk track that gets challenging is like, oh, they're pregnant, so they can't do these things. It's like, actually, not necessarily.
That was a big thing we spoke about today, because or this morning, was around that conversation where it's just like, oh, I've had a kid now for both parents.
Yeah.
Having the baby and then falling into that mum bod, dad bod, I'm going to stop training. Obviously, the different priorities, but it's actually not so the case.
No.
It's you can do so much more than what the status quo is saying to us. I love that piece.
Yeah.
I think that's really.
Yeah, it's really fun chatting with members that have used Whoop in their pregnancy. A lot of people who are like, whether it's CrossFit or skiing or running, and they're like, hey, I actually realized I could push myself so much more in my pregnancy, and Whoop helped me see that. And like, that's great. And then, yeah, you can really, I think kids can be amazing motivation and amazing energy. And yes, limited time in the day to do these things. Trying to figure out how to go running in the morning while pushing my daughter now. But no, yet I don't think we should settle to saying we can't take care of ourselves after.
So what do you think are the key main metrics in the Whoop that people who are pregnant or might be tracking or would be good to track?
Yeah, so always look at your sleep. Get more of it during pregnancy. So your sleep performance, which is basically how many hours you slept versus how much sleep you needed.
You typically do more when you're pregnant?
Yes.
Yeah. Just because you're obviously so much more strain on the body?
Yeah. Or just in general, if you have a good baseline of sleep before, keep it up. It's really helpful to look at your HRV, how that's trending over your pregnancy. So that's your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate, how that's trending. And then I think recovery can be helpful in that time, although it can get a little funny as your body is going through all of these different changes. And then it's really helpful, like with Health Monitor, to understand, do you have any health alerts? Because that could be a sign that something's going on, which sort of, you can tend to be a little bit more susceptible to things going around. And then, yeah, I'd say those are the key ones. And then strain, it's more like depending if you feel like it, great. But if you don't, like I ended up walking a ton. There's a ton of people that, don't work out as much in their pregnancy and they still have healthy pregnancies. It just is listening to your body, right? But sleep is the big one.
Alexi, I've loved this conversation. Yeah. This has been so cool. Hour flies so quickly.
Wow.
Before we do wrap things up, what do you think is the biggest thing that you'd like to touch on that we didn't get a chance to talk about today?
I would say, I think, sometimes people get really intimidated measuring their health. I think it's overwhelming, some of that information. But as you think about, all the different chapters that we live in life, athlete, retired athlete, reinventing ourselves, we go through all these different chapters. I just think it's really powerful for people to have health data that helps them, understand themselves, speak with other people about it. And I think, yeah, it's just like a superpower that I'm excited for more people to have.
Where do you think one would start? Because obviously there's a lot of things that this device can measure
Yeah.
and look at. Where's a good place to start for someone who's new to Whoop?
Well, I'd say if you don't have Whoop, you should get on a 30-day free trial and see what resonates.
Great plug.
It has to be said.
Yes, yeah.
And I think sometimes, a lot of people are wearing lots of different types of wearables and they're versed in it. But people that I think are on the edge and like, do I do it? What is it going to do for me? It's like, just try it and see what happens. It's just helpful to understand, everybody has different areas of opportunity in their metrics. And so if you notice that something seems particularly low or particularly high, that's a helpful place to start. But a lot of health is built on top of really great sleep. And so I think that's often a good place for people to start. And some people sleep, some people are working on sleeping to sleep better. And some people are working on sleeping to improve their resting heart rate or to improve their athletic performance. And so I think it's quite universal. We all need to do it. It's somewhat similar to eating. It's not optional. So that's probably a good place to start.
Alexi, hey, thank you so much. I am so grateful to spend an hour with you, get to know you over this last couple of days. It's been such a cool conversation. Like, I think all the things that we touched on, hormones and confidence, psychological safety we spoke about, the communication piece internally and externally was huge. And then lastly, like cognitive load and pregnancy. I think there's so many golden nuggets in this conversation. So I am super grateful. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing what the product's going to look like in the next 6 months,
Yes,
12 months,
some
couple
fun
of
things
years.
coming. Thank you so much. I super appreciate it.